morning, everyone, and welcome to the workshop today. My name is Rotimi Olale, and I'm going to be the MC for today's program. You're welcome to the workshop on greater inclusion on African youth in public service, a workshop for progressive reforms and our best to achieve them. And we're going to be starting today's program briefly with an opening remarks. And I'd like first to introduce the African Union Special Envoy on Youth, Ms. Ayachebi, for our opening statement.
Thank you very much, Rotimi. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My opening remarks will really be a vote of thanks to everyone behind these 2 days workshop. It might seem like it's just a webinar, but we've been working tirelessly on this project for months now, and we postponed the physical meeting, then we decided to conduct it virtually. So welcome to the Continental Workshop on greater inclusion of African youth in public service. Welcome to everyone joining us on Zoom. We actually had over 3,000 people registered, so I'm hoping that we have enough capacity to have everyone, but also you can watch live at AU Youth Envoy Facebook page. So invite your friends who can join us here to do that. I'd like first to thank our partner, Project Pakati of the African Leadership Institute, particularly the leadership of Dr. Jackie, the CEO of AFLI, and the great coordination of Monique, the project manager. We teamed up with the African Leadership Institute because we share a similar vision that it is inevitable for our generation to be in leadership and to occupy leadership positions that we deserve. And it's imperative to also promote agency and accountability and implement progressive policies, especially the African Youth Charter. As you know, it's one of the most progressive documents on youth in the world, adopted as early as 2006. I'd like to also thank my colleagues at different AU departments and divisions, the Department of Political Affairs, especially Kevin from Public Service Division, and Magda from the African Governance Architecture. And at HRST, the Youth Division, Prudence, Head of Division, and Amanda coordinating behind the scene. So thank you all, colleagues, for the continuous support and close collaboration to advance the youth agenda at the African Union. And then I'd like to thank my team at OAE, especially Chamaka, who led this partnership, Reem and Rotimi for the wonderful facilitation, and the comms team, Nir, Ruth, and Ragda. My team are all volunteers on top of their own work and profession, so they're serving the youth agenda at my office, and I'm very grateful. And I think really without all these stakeholders, this workshop would not have been possible, especially the AU Youth Advisory Council as well, who have given insight before and during the workshop, especially Serine, Aminato, and Nayer, and of course our esteemed speakers who provided in-depth insight yesterday at the breakaway sessions, and the young leaders who would be speaking in the plenary today. And all the youth in public service who are watching us now, this is also an opportunity to celebrate you and the work you're advancing in your countries in governance, especially during COVID-19 pandemic. I think that this is not only a health crisis, but also a governance crisis in Africa, and we should advocate more for the central role of young people to reform our institutions to finally work for our generation post-coronavirus. And I also think we must acknowledge that we are able to have these conversations today because the millennials went to the street since 2010 in waves of youth-led peaceful change that swept across the continent, demanding legitimate rights, particularly in governance. We must see these youth movements, uprisings, and revolutions as an opportunity to channel this energy into engagement in governance and democratic transitions. We looked at youth in Tunisia, Senegal, the Gambia, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and recently Sudan and Algeria, among other countries, engaging in innovative ways in governance and reforms. And we know that Africa is considered the youngest continent in the world. 65% under 30 has become, a benchmark for Africa and the demographic dividend. But despite this youthful composition, the average age of African leadership is 64 years old, and the average age of the population is 20, creating a generation gap in leadership of at least 40 years. And this population is estimated by 2020 to be half under 25. So it doesn't make any sense. The present and the future. This really requires that we examine the leadership structures, values, traditional biases and norms, and cultural shifts needed to make sure that young people are in leadership. We published in October last year the OA Action Plan, and in there we put our theory of change under the intergenerational and policy model, which is what we call intergenerational co-leadership as a preventive measure or approach to address current and emerging crises and conflicts and tensions between generations, because we have the generation that fought for independence, the generation that built the African nation, and the current youthful population trying to navigate a world of continued inequality and exclusion from decision making. So we really don't need a transfer of legacy to our generation as much as we need trust building and wider generational collaboration based on dialogue and policy solutions that would really allow youth to thrive in leadership. I think also that young people cannot take the torch passed down and be expected to do some magic and solve all the issues when we're left with weak infrastructures and many non-functioning bureaucratic systems. So we really must work together and co-create the solution, co-design the tables of decision-making, bring all the generations to that table, especially young women. And I really can't wait to hear from my sisters, Rose, Mahalo, and Emma, on their experience in leadership. I think we need our governments more than ever to deliver services to citizens, and perhaps coronavirus outbreak is a wake-up call into a forced transition to effective service delivery. And now more than ever, our role as young people is not only to engage in governance and hold governments accountable, but I think it has become a duty. It has become almost like a generational responsibility. We need to save our continent from this and future pandemic and step up to leadership and public service. So for us to wrap up, this workshop is the beginning of a conversation. We know there is a need for these workshops to be happening maybe at national level in different languages. So we're open to partnerships to facilitate these conversations. And we hope that this would nurture a community of peer learning and best practices and attract more youth into governments, parliaments, local councils, and politics. And that programs can be initiated out of these conversations, and existing programs also might be strengthened and replicated in other countries. And from my position as a youth envoy, I want to emphasize my commitment to continue to work closely with African youth in amplifying their political voice and leadership, and advocate for the implementation of policies that impact their lives and stimulate generational solidarity and co-leadership, because I really think that young people are ready to co-lead. Thank you very much, and wish you a fruitful and inspiring discussion.
Thank you very much, Aya, for this welcome statement. And I can see that young people from all over the continent invariably have joined us for this conversation. It's time to introduce Dr. Jacqueline Chimanzi, CEO of the Africa Leadership Institute and co-organizers of today's discussion, for our opening statement. Dr. Jackie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Really just to thank you all for joining this important discussion this morning from wherever you are. It really is an important project, and it seeks to bring young Africans to the center of decision-making and governance. And I'm sure as young people, you agree with me that you've been marginalized. You continue to do amazing things, but on the periphery. You're not at the center of governance, you're not part of decision-making structures. So with this workshop, we're hoping to take the outcomes and the key takeaways and begin to go around the continent to advocate for governments to begin to open up spaces to let all of you in. So there are three compelling reasons why this needs to happen. The first one, as Aya mentioned, is that Africa is disproportionately young, yet we do not see enough young people sitting at the table. Obviously, this means that there's no representation. So when decisions are made, your voice is not heard, and it needs to be heard. Second one is that our current leaders, in fact, are doing themselves a disservice by not consulting you, not working with you, because you have the capability to co-create some of the solutions to some of Africa's most pressing challenges. But the more they involve the young talent, the more we all win together. It's a win-win situation. And then the third one is that by excluding you, this is actually not sustainable. We actually need a deliberate succession plan. We need to start bringing young people in now so that they begin to learn how governance works, right? When we talk about Agenda 2063, the truth is a lot of the leaders who are advocating for Agenda 2063 won't be here in 2063. But the sooner they start to bring you in, the sooner you start to know how governance works, the sooner you start to understand how to formulate policy, how to implement policy, create a more secure Africa. So for me, the danger is that when these leaders are no longer here, there's going to be a huge gap because all these young people have been left behind. So the sooner you start to get into these institutions, understand how they work, better it is for everybody. So the way I see this is it's a win-win. We're not here to compete with them. We are here to work with them. We want to collaborate with them. We want to co-create solutions with them. And I think it's in everybody's interest. Thank you so much. I wish you a great day. And I wish you all the best with all the proceedings that will take place. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jackie, for the welcome and opening remarks. And this is quite interesting to have this workshop going on at this time. At this moment, we would take a 2-minute break. In normal climes, if it's not for the current pandemic that we're facing, this is the moment that we'll serve you tea and snacks and encourage you to participate. But we don't have that luxury today. So if you have tea, coffee at home, this is the time to take a sip. When we come back, we would go straight to Mr. Kevin Chacho of the Public Service Division of the African Union Political Affairs Department for his presentation on African Charter on the values and principles of public service and administration. Thank you very much. All right, thank you and welcome once again. Before we take Kevin Chacho from the Political Affairs Division of the African Union, I'd like to invite back Dr. Jacqueline to give us more or less a report back from the breakaway sessions that held yesterday. And before we go into today's presentations and also the debate and Q&A that will come up much later in today's conversation. Dr. Jackie, back to you.
Hi, everyone. So just to feedback on what took place yesterday. So yesterday we had 4 different sessions focused on different ways that Africa can implement policies to bring young people to the center. So the first one we looked at the Not Too Young to Run movement in Nigeria. And that really focused on how we begin to lower the age of political participation so that more young people can begin to participate in politics. So we looked at what that entails. We looked at the challenges, the barriers. I'm not sure whether most of you know, but Samson Itodo told us that it had been a 10-year journey. It wasn't an easy journey. We know they've signed, it's now law. The age has been lowered, but it was a 10-year journey. So what we're hoping to do is to understand some of those lessons and take them into the rest of the continent to see how other countries can also lower the barriers to political participation. We also looked at the special advisory roles. So young people who are brought into governance to serve as technocrats. So these are young people like you who've got special skills, are considered to be experts in their fields, and they're brought in to government. So the issue with that is that governments tend to be made up of politicians. But what we're saying is that you can be a young person who's an expert, you've got a contribution to make, you're not necessarily a politician, so how do you get into government at the center? So one of the things we looked at was special advisor roles and how those can be replicated on the continent to bring more young people in. And again, special advisor roles are very prevalent in Nigeria. So we'll be taking the Nigerian lesson to replicate it elsewhere. We also looked at parallel governance structures that exist largely in Morocco. So the case is that there's a main parliament and then there's a parallel parliament made up of young people. It's almost a parallel structure which interfaces the main parliament. So we try to understand that again as a basis for bringing young people in. Thank you. Over to you, Rotimi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jackie, from the brief of the closer conversation that held yesterday to have this very wonderful and important conversation. I'll go over now to Kevin Chacho, who is with the Public Service Division of the African Union Political Affairs Department, to make his short presentation on the African Charter on the values and principles of public service and administration. You're welcome, Kevin, and it's over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sure we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Moderator, my good friend Rotimi, Ms. Ayachebi AU Envoy, Dr. Jacqueline from the CEO of FELI, all protocols duly observed. Good morning and greetings from the African Union Commission, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So as I proceed with my presentation, I would like to take from where Ms. Ayachebi ended on the impact of the coronavirus. As you can see, the impact of this virus hopefully will make our member states refreshing their mind on how to promote and to boost the public service and administration of our respective countries. As you all know, I mean, I'm not going to educate you more about public service, but you all know public service is an important catalyst and element in promoting good governance on the continent. And if you look around the continent, most of the conflicts that arises is basically because of bad governance, of which one of them is lack of transparency and accountability by our leaders, and also lack of effective service delivery. That is why in 2011, the Charter was adopted at the 16th ordinary session of the Assembly of the Union. Currently, the Charter has 18 ratifications, and it entered into force in 2016. when the 15 countries deposited its ratification instruments within the African Union. So basically, the charter has 7 chapters with 34 articles. So in these 7 chapters, I'm going to basically focus on 4 of them, of which the 4 chapters will basically highlight the importance of modernizing our public service and administration. So the first chapter is basically about the duties of public service and administration. One of the duties of public service and administration is basically to access to public service for all citizens, as well as access to information. But one critical element is basically the modernization of the public service and administration, which requires innovative procedures and the use of modern technology to improve service delivery. So as you can see, when back in the days when this charter was developed, it took into account the fact that at a certain point, different generations will have to be brought on board in order to bring changes to our public service and administration. The second chapter is basically on the code of conduct of public servants. As you all know, as public servants, most of you are currently participating in this event. As a code of conduct of public servants, you need to have some ethical values, such as professionalism, prevention and combating corruption, and one important element which is still yet to be practiced in Africa is the fact that all public service agents must declare their assets at the beginning, during, and at the end of their tenure. Currently, at the level of the African Union, we are working, if you recall, in 2018, the African Union declared the Team of the Year on corruption. So we are currently working with a number of member states, especially Nigeria, on developing an asset and a common African position on asset declaration for all Africans. So which is going to be very important for in order to promote transparency and accountability for all our public service officials once they are in office and once they get out of office. Then, of course, the third chapter is on the right of public service agents. All public service agents, no matter the status quo or whatever, has the right to freedom of expression and can be part of trade unions or associations and all of that. Good working conditions must be guaranteed to all of them, to the public service servants. Remuneration is a very important point also, because as you all know, most often corruption and bribery happens because most of our public service agents on the continent are underpaid. So they tend to find other roads, back roads, to get some additional money to support their families. So if we as member states could work on the remuneration also, then that would be good. Then the last chapter, which is also important, is basically on management and development of human resources, of which I will focus on the capacity development. If you want to make public service reforms happen, you need to develop capacities of people, especially the young people who are supposed to take over. That is why since last year, we at the African Union Commission have been doing a number of capacity development initiatives on the continent, working with our partners, such as AMDIN, African Management Development Institute Network, and even APAM, the African Association of Public Administration. We'll be doing some capacity development on the continent on productivity, the importance of productivity in public service, and also some regional consultations with the different regions on the impact of corruption in the public sector. Now, one of the most important parts is the mechanism for application. As you know, the charter is legally binding once we have ratified and adhered to the principles of this charter. So if any member state has not signed or ratified to this charter, then we cannot hold him or her accountable. So basically, the mechanism for application of the charter goes at 3 levels. At the state parties level first, the state parties are those who have ratified the charter. So once we have 15 ratifications, then the parties are set into force. So the state parties are those who belong among those numbers, 15 and above. So they have a role to implement the charter at national level, making sure it's aligned with the national laws and policy in order to improve the living standard of the people. At continental level, like I said earlier, the AU charter requires 15 ratifications, of which thereafter, the African Union Commission is supposed to organize the Conference of State Parties and establish a secretariat, which is going to overlook the work of this Conference of State Parties. This was done in November 2018 in Kenya. So currently, we are working with member states on how they can report back to the African Union on how they are implementing the provisions of the Charter in order to ameliorate the life of the people on the ground. So we have developed the reporting guidelines, which we have shared, to all member states. This guideline was developed in 2018 and validated by the subcommittee of on public service and administration of the AU-STC8 subcommittee on public service, local governance, urban development and decentralization. It's worth noting that this STC, it's originated from the abolition of the former Conference of African Ministers on Public Service and Administration, which used to be called CAMS. So in 2014, after the transformation of all ministerial conferences, this led down to the transformation of these ministerial conferences into STCs. So the Political Affairs Department is basically the secretary of the STC on Public Service, Local Governance, Urban Development and Decentralization, of which this particular charter falls under. At the regional economic level, the RECs also have a lot to play in this. So they have to encourage their member states in signing, ratifying. They have to encourage their member states in implementing this charter, and they have to also encourage their member states and work with them technically in order to align these instruments with the national laws, so that there's no duplication or controversies when applying these things at the level of Then also, the state parties have to institute a transparent and impartial system for recognizing outstanding performance, creativity, and innovation in public service and administration. Currently, we at the Liberal Department, we celebrate the African Public Service Day every 23 June at national level every year, and every 2 years at continental level. In 2019, we did the African Public Service Day continental celebration in Kenya, and the next one is scheduled for 2021 in Zimbabwe. Also in the same vein, working on the African Expo 2020, we are also having a slot where we are going to have youth engaging, youth innovations on democratic governance. So the Expo is supposed to start in October 2020 in Dubai, but now with the impact of coronavirus, we don't know how it's going to go. But we are working with our colleagues from the AGA Secretariat in making sure that these innovations by young people on democratic governance is showcased at the Expo 2020 Dubai, when the new dates have been agreed on and proceeded with. So there are the final clauses. Then, so basically, just to summarize my presentations, the charter in a nutshell has four main themes. The first is to highlight the link between an effective public service and the promotion of human rights and development. The second promotes higher standards and quality services delivery and emphasizes the role citizens can play. The third focuses on the promotion of ethical practice and behavior and the fight against corruption. Finally, the fourth emphasizes the importance of sound management of human resources, outlining the rights of public servants as well as their roles and responsibilities in improving service delivery. So basically, as you can see, the charter, once adopted back in 2011 by our heads of states and everything, they already took into account the fact that there will be a change that will be needed. And it's important for us to note that once this change happens during our time, we also need to be ready to prepare our younger ones and the generation that comes behind us in the right way so that they can also take over. We need to do things differently. We need to do things differently. So as I conclude, I'm going to end with a quote from one great philosopher called Rumi. He says, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." So what can we take from this? The first is, in order to make this change, we must do things differently. We are young people. We are the ones, we own the continent. I'm sorry to say, we own the continent already. The continent is us. It's our time. It's our time to make the changes. So we must make things differently. We cannot repeat what our elders or what our ancestors have, the mistakes they have done. But what we can do is to tap from what they did and make things better, improve on them. The second is, as young Africans and future leaders of our continent, we have the ability to think out of the box and bring the change. That is why, as you can see in the charter, innovation is there. Innovation is clearly reflected in the charter. So we as young people, let's change the dynamics. Let's do things differently. Think out of the box and bring the change. Let's not follow crowds, or let's not follow money and everything. Let's do the job because we have to do the job. We owe it to our citizens, we owe it to our taxpayers, and we owe it to this beautiful continent. And the last is, we should have the confidence in ourselves that together we can improve public services as well as change its administration in order to improve the lives of our fellow comrades. So basically, Mr. Moderator, distinguished participants, if you may permit me, that was a very brief presentation of the charter, how it's relevant to this course and how it already integrates our concerns of young people in the public services. So I thank you for your attention. Je vous remercie pour votre attention, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for that concise and brief presentation. And thanks for ending with that quote. Yesterday I was clever, I wanted to change the world, and today I'm wise, I'll change myself. Thanks very much, Kevin, for the presentation on the African Charter on the Values and Principles of Public Service and Administration. I'll go right next to Ms. Prudence Ngweya, who is the head of the Youth Division of the African Union HRSD department, who will be speaking to us on the continental briefing on youth policies and leadership. Prudence, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rotimi. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Aya. Good morning, Jackie. Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, young people across the continent. I would like to just do a brief presentation on the AU policies on young people. I was specifically asked to make a presentation on the African Youth Charter, but I've switched it up a little bit to also speak about the programmatic document that guides the implementation of the African Youth Charter. Rotimi, if you allow me, I'd like to share a screen. I have a few slides that I would like to share with the audience. And of course, I will share this presentation with you and you can share it with the audience as necessary. So give me a minute.
We have your screen now on. Hi, Prudence, we have your screen on and
I'm sorry for that, Rotimi. I'm not sure what's happening with my presentation. The technology. It's here. Please let me know if you can see my presentation.
now we can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so like I said, I will just make a presentation around youth policies of the African Union, but also try and tie it into the conversation that is taking place today around leadership. My name is Prudence Ngweya. I am part of the Youth Division and the Education Divisions of the African Union Commission. I'd like to start here because this is where it all started in 2006, and I'm happy to see you, Rotimi, because I know you're amongst the young people who were young then in 2006 when the process of the African Youth Charter started. So it came into being in 2006, and it was necessitated by a conversation that started on the continent by the then young people. Rotimi and I were young people then. Probably Rotimi was a child. I was a young person then. And we're in the forefront, and we're saying bodies like the African Union Commission should begin to speak to the rights and responsibilities of young people. And this is how we pushed and pushed with a number of young people who are not so young today. And the charter came about. And I'm very happy to even say at this point that actually even the development of the charter at that time was led by young people themselves. It's a rights-based document with 31 articles. It outlines responsibilities for governments, but it also outlines responsibilities for young people. My best article of the African Youth Charter is Article 26, which 26A specifically, which speaks to young people being custodians of their own development. So for me, if there's anything that you need to take away from the African Youth Charter, is that it really puts the onus of development on young people themselves. They have to be the custodians of their own development, and it's not anybody's job to make sure they're the ones that have to push it. What you see is in the map of Africa is just nomenclature around ratification, signing and not signing. When the African Youth Charter came to force in 2006, it was a heads of state decision, and 38 member states signed, but signing does not mean that the charter applies at your country. You need to sign and ratify. So actually 42 member states signed, and others opted out and said, oh, we still need to go back to the country and find out if it aligns with our national instruments and things like that. But 38 signed and ratified, and those are the countries in green. But 3 member states have neither signed nor ratified, and this is Botswana, Morocco, and Eritrea. So these are the member states that have decided to opt out, and for them, the African Youth Charter has not even been ratified or even signed, so they don't even recognize it. So the majority of our AU member states have really either signed or ratified and deposited, which means the dictates of the African Youth Charter and all those 31 responsibilities by African governments. Young people at the country level in all these countries, except for the 3, can actually lead advocacy around holding their governments accountable, because they've signed, they've ratified, and most of them have even deposited, all the green ones have deposited the instruments for ratification at the African Youth Charter level. But the African Youth Charter was just the starting point. There's quite a number of policies that are youth-centered and programs at the continental level or at the AU level. We all know about the demographic dividend agenda of 2017, when the heads of state dedicated the year 2017 to harnessing the demographic dividend in young people. Another landmark activity for us was when the Africa Union chairperson announced a youth envoy who is here with us today, and her advisory council in 2018. And we also had the decade plan of action for 2009 and 2018, which was the programmatic document guiding the implementation of the African Youth Charter. And then in 2014, we did its midterm review, but also when Agenda 2063 came in 2013, it asked us to actually develop an Africa Plan of Action on Youth Empowerment. So what we have right now and what we're implementing is what we call APAYE, which is the African Plan of Action on Youth Empowerment, which really looks into the African Youth Charter, but also looks into new things that came after the African Youth Charter, which is the DG agenda and the Agenda 2063. So currently the live document that we are implementing as a programmatic document that guides young people's development at the continental level is the APAYE. But it's also important to note that the African Youth Charter still stays as the basic document that guides youth development on the continent. This is how the APAYE looks like. It's a very orange document, and this is a copy of it. So what it is really it's a 5-year action of framework and plan of action for implementing the African Youth Charter. And like I said, it looks into what was articulated in the demographic dividend, what was articulated in Agenda 2063, and puts all of it together. And it's intended to enable action and serve as a practical guide and framework for accountability for key stakeholders in delivering for young people on the continent. The guiding principles for the APAYE, which is the document that we are implementing now. Sorry about that. The guiding documents is that when we're developing APAYE, we looked at the Youth Decade Plan of Action, the demographic dividend. We looked at all these documents and we said, what are some of the lessons that we we've learned from implementing these documents that we can improve with the implementation of this new document, which is the APAYE. So we looked at a document that is going to be solution-oriented and evidence-based and adaptable to country context. So it's not a one-size-fits-all document, but also emphasis is on high impact and high multiplier interventions, which is why when you look into the APAYE, you will see that we also run flagships, and the flagships are really just targeting high impact and high multiplier interventions. We're also leveraging partnerships. So it provides for a platform to convene partners to work together within an ecosystem to advance the young people's agenda on the continent. It also enforces mutual accountability. So it's an environment where there's joint ownership and mutual accountability across partners and young people, governments, private sector, the Africa Union Commission. And at the center of this document is also youth engagement. So it prioritizes and facilitates the meaningful engagement of young people and ensure that programs are developed and designed and implemented with young people themselves. And it also puts emphasis on mainstreaming and coordination. It provides for a mechanism to maintain youth development across all sectors and coordinate across the sectors. Basically, it has 3 pillars. We are in the business of implementing flagships, and one of those flagships is the 1 million by 2021, which I'm sure you already know about, with the 4 E's, with flagships on health, education, employment, entrepreneurship, and engagement. It also puts emphasis on technical assistance and capacity building at member states level. So we also realize that one of the mistakes we've made in the past is to assume that the Africa Union can run with programs at the continental level. So what APAYE does as part of its strategies is to put emphasis on how can we assist countries to run with programs and accelerate action at country level and get countries to deliver on their mandates. And the last part of it is really around building foundations for youth development around data, partnerships, ecosystem, resource mobilization, and as well as data, making sure that we make available data to influence young people, the young people's agenda. The APAYE model is what we really tried to keep as simple as possible. And we say that we will achieve what we do through APAYE, through the ABCDE model. So if you forget anything about the APAYE, just remember ABCDE. 1, we will deliver APAYE through advocacy, which is the A. Through brokerage, we will connect partners to action at country level. For example, we'll be launching a program with HP. So I call upon all young people to look out for our social media with HP, with Huawei, with Facebook. We are brokering support from these companies to make opportunities available for young people. So APAYE gives us that platform. So we don't just end at advocating and engaging with ministers of youth or education on youth issues, but we also broker and bring in actual actors for meaningful engagement and for opportunities for young people. C is for catalyzing action at country level. I spoke a little bit about that to say that emphasis is on making sure that there's action at the country level and things don't just stay in Addis Ababa at the continental level. And D is for demonstration. We want to demonstrate, we're implementing a number of flagships, and some of them are the ones that I've mentioned with the partners. One of which is even the 1 million by 2021, where we are actually implementing, but this is continental scale implementation to also show that we are demonstrating that it is doable and we can do it, and we call upon countries to adapt. And at the center of all of this is the engagement, and initiatives should provide, and we aim to provide space and for amplifying the voice of young people themselves. So that is the E of the ABCD model. So like I said, if you forget anything about APAYE, just remember the ABCDE model. Most recently, just quickly, we have a youth sector response to COVID. The scope of the response is to reduce risk, the health risk of COVID among young people, but also to minimize the impact of COVID and mobilize young people. Remember, engagement and putting young people at the center is our core business and how we deliver our work. And the strategies for our COVID response are basically four. We want to keep young people safe. We're running a Be Safe campaign. We want young people to continue learning. We realize that with COVID, there's been a lot of disruptions and opportunities for young people to continue learning. So we're working with partners to basically make available opportunities to continue learning. And there's also the innovation piece where we're getting young people to be creative and innovate around COVID challenges. And at the center is that Be a Responder, where young people are responding themselves through volunteerism in a safely manner, and that taking part and are being part of the COVID response, and they're not just spectators. A call to action basically for the meeting today is for us, I think, and for all partners in this meeting, it is very important that we advance the youth development agenda in your spaces and in your countries. Youth-led accountability, I spoke to that, and I also spoke about Article 26A of the African Youth Charter, where young people are custodians of their own development. And to our partners, it is important to align the work of the AU Program for Communication, Cooperation, and Collaboration. So we are happy to work with partners and to make sure that there's a coordinated approach. And young people to maintain their innate creativity and agility of youth in the spaces you inhabit, engage your constituencies and continue to give influence to your values as part of that youth-led accountability, and calling your governments accountable for all the policies and charters that they sign into. And this is really captured in the Article 26A of the African Youth Charter, which calls for young people to be custodians of their own development. All of the work that we do on young people is actually inspired by Aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063, which speaks to an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of its African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for its children. Thank you very much, and that's it. Thank you, Roti. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prudence, for that very enlightening presentation, which is also very visual and goes straight to showcasing the work that the Youth Division is doing. And like you urged everyone, if you don't remember anything, remember the ABCDE: advocacy, brokerage, country level engagement, demonstration, as well as engagement. It's very important that young people continue to advocate and also connect, as well as continue to engage at all levels within ensuring that youth development continues to have impact at both country and regional levels. The hashtag for today's conversation is Africa Youth Lead. Please join us on Twitter and continue the conversation. And also remember that we are live on our Facebook page, the African Union Youth Envoy Facebook page. So kindly encourage your friends and colleagues to also join us on that platform. We'll go now to the next conversation, and which is going to be a conversation on youth in public service, limitations, obstacles, and key considerations from young public servants. On this panel conversation, I would have Ms. Rose Wachuka, Ms. Bogolo Kenewendo, and Honorable Emma Theophilos. First, I'll start with Ms. Rose Wachuka. I would ask you to kindly introduce yourself and go straight into your presentation. You will have 6 minutes for this. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about my own experiences as a considerably young person in the public service. I will start by introducing myself and my entry into the public service. My name is Rose Washuka Macharia, and I serve currently as the Policy Advisor and Chief of Staff to the Cabinet Secretary or Minister for Sports, Culture and Heritage here in Kenya. I started my service in mainstream public service in 2012 when I joined the judiciary upon recruitment by the Judicial Service Commission to serve as a law clerk to the inaugural Supreme Court as a law clerk. That means that I was engaged with the judging chambers to support their work or their processes in court. And while I served in this position, I had the rare experience of participating in settling constitution and public interest jurisprudence, as well as electoral jurisprudence. In 2016, I joined the executive. So I made a shift from the judiciary to the executive, the Public Service Commission, and worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, still in the minister's office. And had a contribution in many multilateral processes, WTO, UNCTAD, bilateral country engagements and others. I then transitioned with the minister to the Ministry of Education as the Chief of Staff and Policy Advisor in the year 2018 and 2019. And there we had a monumental focus on vocational training, competency-based education, education for girls, safe schools, and policies such as that. And then currently I serve as the Chief of Staff and Policy Advisor in the Office of the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage. And today is Africa Heritage Day, so happy Africa Heritage Day to all of you. I was asked to talk about some of the unique challenges that I've encountered in my work in the public service. And some of those include, of course, working within the labyrinth. Because as you know, the government is a huge machinery that has different coordination arms. And as a person working in the public service, as a young person working in the public service, sometimes it can be a bit intimidating to work through the complexities, the bureaucracies, and the networks. And in the advent of COVID-19, I strongly believe that public service has to change. And the way it has to change is that we cannot confine it to just government. We have to expand it to bring in the private sector, to bring in the social sector, and to bring in our communities. Because this challenge has shown us that a government alone approach cannot work in terms of serving the public. And while we may be tempted to sort of resort into, a more protectionist model to protect the people, we have to allow the people to go through the difficult changes with us. And so one of the difficulties that of course we're going to encounter, and I'm already encountering, is how do we engage in this post-COVID era that has challenged the way we do business, that has challenged the way we lead, and that has demanded more inclusion of people across our communities? What kind of models do we need to reinvent? Because we certainly have to reinvent those models. I think we are now living in an age of leadership without easy answers, and we must allow our societies and communities to make the tough choices with us. So the public service is in an era where it has to expand beyond what it has been for a long, long time. We must adapt to the changes and allow our citizens to guide us on sustainable, adaptive ways to enhance and reinforce our resilience and our people's resilience. I think the other things that I was asked to talk about is whether age impacts my execution of duty. And I think part of my strength working in the public service is actually my age, because I have a broad, a fresh mindset, and I'm able to sort of reinforce, other mindsets, to learn from them, but also to inspire different mindsets. So I think that young people in the public service, and inclusion of young people in the public service is an asset. Is an asset to government, and is an asset to communities. And case in point is the fact that we have to change our work models from physical working to virtual work models. And many of the young people working in the public service are supporting the entire public service to sort of make that shift from physical meetings to virtual meetings. And so I think it is a huge asset to be a young person in the public service at this particular point in time. I would advise any young person who wishes to join the public service to distinguish between role and self. Because when you're in there, you have to understand your default settings, because sometimes it can get very cumbersome, and you can see things that you don't like and you need to push back. And sometimes the fear of being reprimanded, or the fear of losing your job, or sounding off may grip you. But if you understand your default settings and anchor yourself in a value system that is reinforcing to the community, I think that service in the public service can be quite satisfying, impacting to community, to society, to your country, and to self. In terms of government expanding opportunities for young people to serve in the public service, I think Kenya has set the way by incorporating a broad internship program where fresh graduates can then join and intern in the public service, paid internship in the public service for a year before then they can government can find avenues to absorb them. I'm also a beneficiary of the technical advisory program by the public service, because I'm a technical advisor, I'm a technocrat, advising the minister in different portfolios. And so I think that it is also a program that has allowed young people to come into the public service and serve on these advisory capacities without destabilizing the structure of the public service, but reinforcing and feeding into it. So I would ask of governments to actually create avenues and opportunities for young people to engage. But as I said earlier, I think execution of public service has to change, has to expand, and it has to get into the communities. It has to bring in the civil sector, it has to bring in the private sector, and we all now have to sort of support the broader vision of ensuring that our people become resilient, that we build our communities in a way that we create, communal structures that are able to rise with the changing times. And so centralized public service, to me, cannot survive the post-COVID era. And I see the opportunity of the government expanding its structures and its reach to communities, and thereby bringing on board a lot more young people. And we have to remember that because of the changing ways of doing business, we have to enable as many people to participate as possible, not just online, but even in communal structures, in sub-communal structures, in national structures, and in county structures, as the case is in Kenya. And I think the government of Kenya has truly and remarkably, gotten into those spheres and allowed as many communities, as many members of the communities, and as many decentralized structures feed into the public service. Ask yourself these three questions. Why do you want to get into the public service? How will you keep your spirit alive when the going gets tough? Because it will, on more than one occasion. And how will you adapt, grow, and evaluate impact upon yourself and your country? Thank you very much. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us in government. And I know it's not an easy task working in government, especially around managing people's expectation. When people hear you work in government, there are lots of expectation. They expect you have a bucket of cash in your car every day to give out to people. We'll come to a bit of interaction and Q&A, but let me go over quickly to Bogolo Kenewendo to also give a short presentation and share experience. Bogolo, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm also pretty excited to be joining you today. And I feel like Rose and I have had a similar experience. But let me start off by introducing myself. My name is Mahalo and I'm an economist. I specialize in trade and macroeconomics, and I was the Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry for Botswana, and served as a member of parliament for a total of about 3 years, till about November last year. And so looking at some of these questions that have been put out, I think I just want to start off by saying, there's a lot of expectation expectation that you said earlier when a young person assumes office, especially political and public policy offices. And more so because so many young people feel disenfranchised by the system, and the trust levels of faith in the public sector by young people is so low. So when a young person assumes such an office, the expectation both internally in an institution and in the community is that they outperform their peers, is that they deliver something of concrete value, as well as something that will be relevant to the institution, but also to the young people who are primarily, or who primarily see themselves as your constituents. And the main challenge is actually trying to manage these expectations in a background of a cemented culture in a public sector, cemented culture in an institution. And you know, the best thing to do, or the advice that I have been given by those that served before me, and that I continue to give, is the best thing you have to do to avert such a challenge is to take a back seat, observe, learn what are the pros and cons of that cultural, of that institution, culture in the institution, and of that background, and see how best to navigate that, especially when you are aspiring to lead a transformative change in that institution. And some of the issues really that come with such an old and rigid system is that you find it really difficult to first employ your own people, because you are becoming a part of an institution, and it's very difficult to even empower some of the young people that you think understand the vision that you want to lead and to drive within the ministry or whatever the institution it is that you're working in. So you have to really learn how to navigate and provide ownership to the team that you find there, in order for them to really want to help you deliver the transformative change and the impact that you want. Another thing is, again, going back to who your constituents are. Yes, you're serving the entire nation, but there is a general expectation, or a very specific expectation, that as a young person in the public sector, you primarily serve the needs of young people. And so one of the main challenges is finding an opportunity to integrate new technologies into this institution, and find ways of fostering workplace collaboration, both with your institution, with development partners, as well as the private sector and the community, and therefore creating a loop of feedback with your stakeholders, because especially as a young person, there is very high pressure for you to have eyes and ears on the sector in which you're serving, just so you do not misstep. Again, I cannot understate how critical this is, the expectation, and as well as the people that are, waiting to see if indeed a young person can deliver, as well as those that are in support of the work that you want to do and are cheering on for a young person to deliver. So the other challenge is the gatekeepers of the system. I found that as a young person, first you can be very technologically driven, and you are not just, or at least I wasn't just working from a position of implementing policies for the economy of today. I was starting to think about the economy that we are all going to be bequeathed with, one that we would like to live in a space of 10, 15, 20 years. And so when you have a vision that is so long term, and that needs an institution to change, you're going to butt heads a lot with those that see themselves as the gatekeepers of how a government has always worked. And you have many times people that say, yeah, but this is how it's always worked, we've always done it this way, why fix something that isn't broken? And the challenge is the system of today won't be a system for tomorrow. So you have to find ways of engaging the gatekeepers and ensuring that you have allies that want to help you deliver in the transformation that you want, the transformation and the vision that you want. And lastly, one of the challenges I said earlier is there are many people that want to believe that youth leadership is not African, that young people don't or shouldn't be at the tables of policy making and decision making. So there will be a lot of pushback. And in order to avert such a situation, I encourage that young people take on mentorship, that they find mentors. And mentorship is not only from people who've been ministers or who've been in that position. It is seeking wisdom that can help you in delivering and in navigating the channels and the paths that you find yourself in. People that understand the politics and people that understand the system that you're working in. And I think after I left office, I was asked a very specific question. Why is it that we do not find professionals who thrive in politics? And my response was really quite short, that I think it's just that the professionals, the technocrats, tend to just focus on the impact, on the deliverables, and they forget to play the politics. And it is so important, if we are to be, if our role in politics is to be sustainable, that we play the politics, that we understand the politics, that we have mentors in politics, while we also focus on the deliverables that come with being a professional and a technocrat. And however, we also have a very wonderful and supportive network of young people, and it's important that you tap into that network as well, because you want to understand how it's been done in other countries, so that you are also able to effectively influence your policy, but most importantly, create impact. See, it's important, as I conclude, that we focus as young people in leadership, we focus on the impact, because our lifespan is long. If you make a mistake now, if you're empowered now, if you're in office now, that legacy that you work on will be with you for quite a while. And does corruption affect your position? Of course, corruption affected the position. There are people that feel that in order for you to be more lenient to their sectors, or to change policy, yes, I'm wrapping up, or to change policy towards them, they need to offer you something. And again, like I said, our lifespans are long. So we need to be focused, and we need to be principled and live in a very honorable manner, because this is a legacy that will follow us for quite a while. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bogolo, for sharing your experience. And I think it's quite, in many ways, similar to also what Rose from Kenya shared with us earlier. But let me follow up with you on a question. Many times, a lot of people have said, speaking to young people who have worked in public office, I said it's always a challenge, because first you're looked at as being young, you have very little experience, and some other people have also said, because you're also a woman, you also face a double challenge. Has this been
oh yes,
can you share a bit of experience around that in your own perspective?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a double challenge. You're young, you're female, and you're African. Now, if we're talking a more global perspective, it's not just that you are to deal with issues of the country, you have to serve the constituency that I said earlier of young people. Then in addition to that is a constituency of women and children, specifically because those feel like you can understand their issues better, and you can help to change policies that are more lenient towards them. But in addition to that, it's also working in a patriarchal society that you'll be deemed as, oh, but you're too young, you shouldn't be here. Oh, but what does a young girl like yourself know about this? And those are some of the challenges that you face, and you have to rise above that. And one of the things is to always be prepared. You have to be prepared. You cannot wing it. If it's a policy talk, if it's negotiations, you can't just show up. You have to be prepared, and you need to know what it is that you're talking about in order to set yourself in that position. And again, I just want to clarify, because I saw one of the points saying playing politics. What do I mean about that? I just mean you have to be aware of the space in which you're working on, not to just play in the politics. It's not about the corruption. It's about knowing whose toes you're stepping on, whose toes you need to look out for, where are the landmines, because if you don't understand those dynamics, then you will not be able to live out the vision that you want to deliver.
Let me bring Rose into this conversation. I can see that she's nodding her head and agreeing to some of the things that you have said. Rose, same question. Being young, being a woman in public service, what are the challenges you face specifically?
I mean, my experience has very much been what Bokolo has also said, that people look at you and ask, what does a young girl like you have to bring to the table? And I remember when I joined the Ministry of Education, I had a really difficult challenge fitting in, because my role was coordinating the entire ministry, and the entire ministry really, almost everybody was older than me. There are challenges there, but my own personal way of dealing with that is evolutionary as opposed to revolutionary. I was a revolutionary for many years, from 2004 to 2014, when I served on African advocacy issues. But when I got into the public service, I had to change that approach, because you cannot fight the system and win. What you have to do is find pockets of engagement. What you have to do is really attune yourself to the culture within the public service. If you need to make any impacting change, you have to sort of try and pull everybody into the conversation, and not shy away from going to your leadership and really making that presentation, that impassioned presentation. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't work, then find allies within the system who will sort of reverberate what it is that you're trying to do. But you have to understand what the end game is, and what you need to achieve. But yeah, people look down upon you. There are inappropriate, people treat you inappropriately because you're female and you're young. Apparently, you're not supposed to look the way you look. It's all very horrible. Yes. And some of the ways that I've dealt with that is calling it out when it happens, because I don't want another young person, another young woman, to go through that same treatment. You have to call sexual harassment when it happens. You have to call innuendos when they happen. So don't shy away from that. Because as I said, what is your default setting? And that default setting has to be infused by your own personal values and the values you see for the public service and for your country. And if you don't stand in that position, because those positions are few and not everybody can access them, but can you create opportunities for others to come in and sort of open up for more people? So yeah, there have been challenges, but you have to call them out.
Young people working in public sector in Africa is not the norm, it's the exception. How can we create opportunities for more young people like yourself to find spaces in public sector? Let me.
I sometimes look back at. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Oh, thank you. So I sometimes look back at when I was appointed minister. The post trended, it went worldwide, and it was because people felt like we hadn't seen a youthful and female face in that position in a long time. But since I've been appointed, I mean, we We are no longer surprised when Emma is appointed. You know, we've had 2 ministers in Angola. We have in Eswatini and South Africa, everywhere, and we are seeing this change happening. And after I was appointed, whenever I'd meet different heads of state, I would call it out. I'd say, yeah, they'd say, oh, you are that minister who's causing us trouble. Now we're expected to appoint young people. And I'd say, you should try it. You will like it. Mainly because young people will give you those fresh ideas, but you will also be able to serve a population that is now the majority in your country. And you know, we're seeing this change happening. It's all about calling it out, not being able to speak your mind. And when you are in this position, again, I want to clarify that public office is not only about being the minister or serving the minister's office. It's also about being able to find those experts to put in boards and SOEs and so forth. And so when I had an opportunity of filling a board seat, I would make sure that it is 50-50. There's a young person and there's an older person, because you also, like Rose said, you also don't want to have too much of a pushback, because you still have a long way to go. You want to have buy-in. So instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to have a board full of young people, I would try to balance it out. Instead of just saying, okay, I'm just going to have women, I'd also try to balance it out. But sometimes if I'm at an award and I'm expected to present awards, I would say, are there any women that are winning this award or that were being considered for this award? And if no, then I'd make it clear that I would rather be a part of something that is representative and inclusive. And so let me know next time when you are being a bit more inclusive, or if you have tried. Now, if you say you tried and you didn't manage, then we can start talking and we can proceed. But I think it's also important that we put our foot down and we also learn how to navigate to have those allies, people who will help you, your mentors that will also look out for you.
Yeah, if I might also come in and make a contribution on that. I was looking at the World Bank report on the effects of COVID-19, and 6.7% of the global working hours will be wiped out, meaning that we will lose about 195 million full-time workers. And in Africa, as of today, 9 million jobs are on the line. And so I don't think it's any more about giving young people an opportunity to serve in the public service. It is not an ask. It is actually a prerogative. It is very, very important to actually have an all-inclusive public service that includes people who will bring a freshness to the way we do business. I think we have to expand our ICT capacities, and we know that ICT capacity is with young people. And if we do not adapt and allow more young people to join in our governance structures, we can't survive. We can't survive what's coming post-COVID. And so that is the rallying call that I'd like young people to take out of this crisis, that your inclusion and your participation in governance is important. It is important to the survival of our countries. It is important to the survival of our governments. And so don't shy away and wait to be identified. Move forward, bring forth your innovations, get together and have webinars and have discussions. I've seen an aspect of nepotism being discussed quite a bit in the comments. And if I could tell you, I know that it's a real problem that we have, that a lot of people who sort of get into these positions ultimately are quote unquote connected, but there's also the other way. Listen, nobody can take your brain or your capacity for granted. And what you do is, if there's not enough room for you in a particular place, you create room for other people, and you sort of put yourself out there, because real leadership is not just within the thrones and the corridors of government. You can go to your community and bring us impacting, difficult to ignore innovations that will ultimately impact more people than you would have, if you waited for anybody to sort of handpick you. But there's also the other way, access to information, because there are opportunities for young people to intern in government, and that's a competitive process. And I've always known that the difference between getting in and not getting in is completing that application process. So it's about knowing when the opportunities are, where they are, and applying for them and preparing yourself for those opportunities. It is difficult to work in the public service. I spend many weekends working, and that's the reality of many people. But if today I did not work in the public service, I would still serve in the public, because I would find needs and challenges that require my input within the communities. And that really is where we need the impact. It has to be bottom up, not top bottom. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you. My other question would be, and quickly, let me encourage people to post more questions in the Q&A. We'll take a few questions using the Q&A button on this webinar. And let me encourage you all to continue to tweet using the hashtag #AfricaYouthLead. My next question would be to both of you. How do you manage expectation? I was speaking to a friend who works in government in Nigeria, and he was saying to me that every morning when he wakes up, he looks at his WhatsApp messages. He gets an average 300, 400 messages every day, and 90% of these are requests, money, financial requests, help with hospital bills and all of that. How do you manage expectation? There's that certain expectation that people have that when you're in government, you have access to a lot of resources, and you should be able to dole these out as favors to friends and families and relations. How do you manage this expectation? And the second question linked to this is also about change. Young people are impatient with change, but by the setup of African public service, there's this bureaucracy that makes change process very slow. And you mentioned about issues around changing strategy from being a revolutionist to evolution within public office. How do you manage the issues of change? And we also know that when it comes to innovation, Africans look up to its young people to innovate, but we're not seeing this innovation play within the public sector in Africa. How do you respond to these issues? Let me start with you, Rose.
Actually, in my unique challenges, process and time were some of the things that I highlighted, that sometimes I get discouraged by the length of time that things take to pan out in the public service. But in terms of managing expectation, I also do think that the problem of corruption comes in, because the reason why so many people have expectations upon people who work in government is because we live lives that we should not be living. Because really, public service remuneration is not that high. So when we talk about how you live, how do you justify the way you live, unless of course you're pilfering public coffers. And we have to have that conversation on corruption. I do not expect you as a young person to join government and within the next 10 years you own 10 buildings in Nairobi. You're a thief. That's just the plain truth of it. And so expectation within our communities has been normalized by acceptance of corruption. Because and I'm not saying that people should not live comfortably. I'm just saying that, people should be able to portray a public service as really what it should be, living within the means, within your means. And so I have not had an easy time in terms of wrapping my head around how do we lose so much money in the public service. It's like watching your economy and your country bleed, So I think instead of rising expectations, I think it's our prerogative as young people across the continent to call out corruption and to try and change the tides of this wave of corruption, because really it is bleeding our economies, it's bleeding our people. Corruption is killing more people than pandemics, really. And so I think it's our prerogative to stare the gross injustices in the face and call them out. In terms of change and how do we manage change, I think that nature will be our ally. I think that things happen within the natural course of business that will sort of catalyze that change. But if we bring more people with different energies and different outlooks and different expectations and different ways of working. And if we adapt our daily servings of policy and of engagement, and if we define public service, beyond the confines of government structures, and if we lead the way we are supposed to lead, from the people to the top and not from the top to the people, then I think we're going to start seeing some of the issues we have about time and about processes over time. Education is a big deal, and I say that it is the number one policy that we have to keep focused on, because we also have to bring in and build capacity for people to sort of bring the type of energy and the type of skills and knowledge that we need. And so if we sort of allow ourselves to question how things work and to question systems and to sort of adopt the uncommon approaches to change. So go to the community and empower the community and allow the community to inspire us in terms of doing business. I think we'll start seeing some changes. For me, it's about inspiration and perspiration, the mindset and the attitude and the sweat that comes with driving this change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. Over to you, Bogolo.
Indeed, there's a lot of expectation. People think when you're a minister, you have access to all these resources and you should be able to help out of pocket. And like Rose said, I think this is just fodder for corruption. And the more we entertain it, the more we actually put people in a box and in a corner to engage some of those corrupt practices to be able to fulfill this. And I actually think that this is also, it increases the barriers and the cost of the entry into politics and public office, because if you're going to be in public office, then there's this expectation that you should be wealthy, you should have a bigger house, you should have a big car, be able to dole out cash out of pocket. But the one way to move past this, and what I always tried to do as a minister whenever I received so many requests, was to try to find the right office that is supposed to respond to this need. And if you're an OVC, often vulnerable children, or those that are supposed to be benefiting from a social welfare package, then I would follow up to find out why it is that that particular person hasn't received that package on time, and how we can hasten the process in order for them to for their needs to be met. And similarly, when people would call and say, no, I need to go see a private doctor, instead I would call the public hospital to find out if there is any space, there's someone who's in dire need, can they help? So that is really how I tried to manage those expectations and lessen the burden on my being. Because again, I really tried to make sure that there was a separation of person and the office in serving and relating with the office. And I think, like Rose said, we really need to be careful here with the expectations. The more we continue to yield to them, the more we create this need and demand for corruption. And people find those loopholes. They come to you and they say, yeah, Minister, we know that people are going to need this from you, so why don't I help you out? And you always know when something comes easy, it means it's going to request something later. So the best is to rely on the system and make sure that the system works. And what I used to say is, while you're helping this person because I've asked you to as a minister, please make sure that you are also working to fix the system so that I have fewer people that are requesting for such assistance from me, or can only get assistance when a minister speaks on their behalf. And on issues of turnaround time, it's important to plan to have the vision that I spoke about earlier, but to plan in both the short term and the long term. Because again, if you do not see any any results, you can get demoralized and feel like you're not really making that impact. But when you create a system for yourself that shows you where the low-hanging fruits are and those that can be achieved in the short term, then it is easier and it keeps motivating not only you, but also your team that wants to feel like they really are a part of something and the vision that can be delivered and create impact immediately. And in speaking in the short term, sometimes it's all about what is it that can be delivered in my own space, right? In my own ministry, that doesn't need input from other ministries. What is it that can be delivered without the need for changing legislation? Because that can take years. And if you're lucky, in the shortest possible amount of time, it can be 8 months if we are lucky. So in the meantime, you have to think, what are the low-hanging fruits that can be done internally? What can we change internally? Is it the way we welcome our clients, the way we treat them, the way we open up, and how can we integrate as well? And this is what we try to do as well, integrate ICT in order to efficiently and better serve the public.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the quite a lot of questions that we've received on the Q&A platform. And there are quite a number of questions focusing on internships and opportunities, and some about how do we get into the technical advisory program. Can you speak to this? Are there formal ways in both Botswana and Kenya that young people can get into public service and serve at different levels, offering their technical skills and capacity? What are these pathways and how can young people engage? Let me start with Rose.
Thank you so much, Rotimi. In Kenya, for instance, I think around January, December last year, the government rolled out a call for interns within the public service. And I know that these young graduates were matched in terms of their skills to different ministries within the public service. And I know that we have about 32 in the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage. And so that's just one way. The other way is the technical advisory roles. And these technical advisory roles are sometimes offered by our development partners, such as the World Bank, to support specific projects within ministries. I know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a cadet entry level position to join the foreign service program, and I know that takes on quite a huge cohort of young people to sort of start the ranks of diplomatic service. I know that the National Youth Service also takes in quite a bit of young people, and I know that they are engaged in different aspects of building the nation. So there are different aspects. I think where we might get into problems is information. Young people knowing or having access to this information when the processes, before the processes begin. That's one. Two is preparation. How well do we prepare our young people to engage in processes like this? And one of the ways that I would advise is volunteerism. Remember, you cannot create expertise on anything, and especially if you're young and a new entrant into the job sphere, without really going out and trying to harness and create capacity in terms of skills or education. And that's where we need to sort of focus as well. The government also has a process where it sort of reduces the taxation or waives taxation for international companies who take on a certain percentage of young people to intern with them. And when I worked at the Ministry of Education, I know that I worked with the MasterCard Foundation, Equity Bank Foundation, and the Office of the President to set up a program to train 5 million young Kenyans, to not just to train, but train and transition into meaningful opportunities within the next 5 years. And a bulk of this were going to be young women, because young women were significantly at a disadvantage. And so some of those things take a bit more time, but there are deliberate efforts to ensure that the public service has young people on board. Technical advisory roles are requested by separate ministries. So a minister might require capacity in their office, and so they will write to the Public Service Commission for the Public Service Commission to find a suitable person for that position. I know that those processes are not enough. I know that we need to keep expanding. And as I said, I truly believe that we have to open up more avenues and more opportunities within our county governments, if countries have federal systems, or within our communities, in case our countries have centralized systems, to just ensure that we have career centers across the country, that we are working with our institutions of higher learning to give this information and to spread this information. And we have to keep harnessing these issues. But yeah, the ones that do exist. I do not think they're enough. So I think that we have to keep expanding these opportunities.
Thank you very much. And just let me add this question for you, Bogola. I'm looking at a question from Lamia Zulu on the Q&A platform. It says, Rose, how are you able to change your mindset from a revolutionist to an evolutionist? Because I think there were moments you were tempted to act as a revolutionist. How are you able to handle this?
Sorry, that's for Rose, right?
That question is for Rose before we come to you.
Sorry, come again. I was looking at the chat box.
The question is, how were you able to change mindset from revolutionist to evolutionist that you spoke about earlier? And were there moments that you were tempted or that you had to bring on your revolutionist mindset when you were as you continue to work in public office?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really long story, but as Aya sometimes tells me, is that government has sort of silenced me. But she makes fun of me for that. But in 2014, I attended the World Forum for Democracy in Strasbourg, and I was in the audience just listening to the interventions. It started to dawn on me that sometimes we take young people as tokens, and I'm going to be very honest. Allow me to be honest on this, because then I want us to have as a raw conversation as possible. I looked around the table, and a lot of the young people who had gone there, in my opinion, really I started to feel like a token. Like, I will fly you over to France or Italy or the US or Nigeria just to tick a box that my conference had young people in it. And it was very empowering, because that realization was as a result of a lot of the discussions and conversations I had with a lot of young people. And every time I went to an international conference, I would see the same people over and over again. And I became very concerned about where the rest of the continent was. So if there was a conference at the African Union headquarters, there would be myself and a handful of other people. I mean, I knew them. I knew that these are the people I expected to see in Addis, and it just didn't seem like the best representation of young people within the continent. And I was very proud of the Africa Youth Movement that I started, because it was also as a realization of that closed, very specific, same people sort of thing that we were starting to notice, and opening that up to more young Africans to engage and participate. And so I decided that I was going to retire from youth advocacy and join mainstream public service, because I wanted a shot at having, to sort of like influence policy. And it was very naive when I started, because I thought that I wanted to work for the public service, that I'd start at the judiciary, and then I'd get into the executive and probably go through the legislature. I've had to readjust my expectations quite a bit, that sometimes it's not an instant noodle kind of system, that you have to get in and you have to strive and give the process a lot of patience. Remember, when you anchor yourself into the public service, it is not your project. It's a politically negotiated project that you help to execute and implement. And sometimes it may not align to your vision, but it aligns to the vision of the country, the political aspect of the country, whose power is drawn from the people. And so that change of mindset from implementing what I think is best and what I think should happen, to really just supporting that national vision is what drew me into the public service and changed my mindset from revolution to evolution. I had to evolve and allow myself to support and allow myself to learn and be taught and get tired and be beat down and rise and be inspired, and continue to sort of find opportunities within the public service that are not very international, that are very localized, very back end, very behind the scenes to support the broader national vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Bogolo.
Okay, I was reading the comments. Okay, so I think I want to start off actually with one point that I see being mentioned quite often of, you know, when you join government, you get absorbed into it and you die as an activist. And I think that is not true. If you remain true to your principles and you know, your beliefs, and the reason why you are an activist to begin with is that when you reach a position of power, then you engage more directly with the people that can make the change. You can no longer be standing out in the soapboxes and yelling at the government that you're supposed to be working with and working for. So your activism, your tact has to change, because now you are speaking directly to the people that have to make the change. And sometimes the people are you and your internal team and not government-wide. So things tend to happen differently. And again, because things take so long to happen, sometimes it just feels like you are not doing anything. While in the system, internally, you are really trying to push for something to happen that you believed should have happened a long time ago, but then you start to face a lot of the hurdles, some of which I mentioned a lot earlier when we started this conversation. Sorry, what was the other question?
Well, the other question is also about how do you create pathways for young people to get into the system?
Oh, right. Yeah. You know, I kind of removed that question because I felt like Rose really adequately answered it. I think it's a similar process for most countries that you find their internships. For us, they are domiciled at the Ministry of Youth and National Service as well at the Ministry of Youth. And then if you want to join the government, you go through the Department of Public Service Management and you register there and you stay in queue to be employed by the government. But I also think over and above just being in government, again, I mentioned this earlier, serving in development is not just being in government. Serving in public policy is not just being in government. It is also in influencing policy from outside in the private sector. Start your businesses, let them advocate, bring the change, ICT, but also join lobbying groups. There are many lobbying groups. I started when I was an economist. I was with the lobbying group of Business Botswana, and you know, we had a youth and business advocacy group or lobbying group, and we would go and meet the Minister of Youth and tell them what our challenges were, and every quarter we would review: are we making progress, are we not making progress, and what else do we need to do in order to see some of those changes. Again, lobbying is not a magic bullet. You converse, you are again being an activist, but in a different form, and you need to be patient with some of the challenges, with some of the changes, but also be forceful, because you know, patience in itself is not going to generate the change that we want to see. And volunteerism, obviously, honestly, start anywhere. Be a UN volunteer, an AU volunteer, at your church. You know, there are always people watching. You will think no one sees your small moves or that you're not in the spotlight, but it's never really about the spotlight. It's about the little impact that you create. I will give you an example. One young person that I know was assisting at a clinic. An old woman did not know that that old woman's son owned a whole private practice. And because of the way that she treated that old woman, the son called and said, I would like for you to come and work for me. It is about ensuring that however you treat people is the way that you would like to be treated, is being courteous, being honorable, and being true to the true principles of both.
So my final two questions, because we're running short of time, we will close this conversation shortly to both of you. One is about how do we make sure that these reforms go beyond representation at face value, and also make sure that young people make meaningful contribution to government. There's a lot of angst on social media, where young people go on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, and just pour out their emotions about government practices. Is that the way to go for young people to get engaged in sort of contributing to public space, to government reforms, or are there alternative pathways that is more sustainable and can lead to meaningful contribution? And that's one. And finally, the second one, which will be on the lighter side, and I would like you to keep it to 2 minutes each, would be how do you self-care? You guys are doing a lot of work. You ladies are doing a lot of work. How do you find time to self-care and take care of yourself? Let me start with Rose, and then I end with Bogolo.
Rotimi, I think the foremost thing that I have noticed that the young people have to really be serious about is the vote. I think many times we like to raise issues about the leaders that we have put in parliament or the leaders we find in the executive. But ultimately, that choice in the ballot is with you. And the education, civic education that goes on in the grassroots has to start with you. And I know that it's a lot, it's a burden to place these obligations on the shoulders of young people. But the present really belongs to us. And as Bogolo said earlier, we have the longest, inshallah, to live in our own countries, and we owe it to ourselves and our children to create a system and to put people in leadership that we would ourselves be proud of. And I know the question of poverty is an issue that I constantly struggle with, because given the threat of going hungry and the opportunity to get some handout from a political aspirant, we know what would be sort of very, very easy to choose or in the circumstances. And so I would encourage young people to keep voting and to keep educating others, what I'm calling peer education, on the impact of the vote and the impact of putting the right leaders in the right places. Because ultimately, some of these policies will turn into action only if we have visionary people in these places of leadership. But also to not wait. Don't wait for permission from anybody to engage, whether it's in your community, whether it's your peers, or whether it's yourself. I think leadership is a self-driven exercise, and leadership itself is not a verb; it's an adjective. It's an action. So when you're in action, you're in leadership. And I do know and I do believe that grassroots action can sort of change policies, can revolutionize the way we do things. And the late Professor Wangari Maathai is a great example of what that communal power can do to the future. So vote, engage in communal power, and call it out. Write, host webinars, discussions, whatever it is, just let your voice be heard, because that's the most powerful piece that you have with you. Allow your brain the freedom to really, move into spaces that you otherwise would think that they shouldn't be. Don't second guess yourself. And I know that with self-awareness and discipline, you can push for this change. And I know that there will be pushback, criticism, and personal attack. But we must evolve to develop the freedom to respond with non-defensive defense when the attack is personal, and extend our options when it's not. So if there are options, if these documents require you to take communal action, take communal action, but put the right leaders where they should be. In terms of self-care, it is a really delicate place to be. And I've been in places where I've felt like I have really neglected myself because I'm always working. But you cannot work if you're dead, and you can't work if you're unhealthy. You can't work if you're not in the best brain set. So identify a set of people who will sort of like be your sounding board, yeah, and allow yourself to be vulnerable, you know, with the struggles that you're going through. Find support systems and support mechanisms and be true to them, and be uncompromising about personal time and the time that you need to spend building your mind and building your soul and your body for action. Pull back. I like to say, get on the balcony and watch the dance floor, because you cannot understand and you can't see yourself on the dance floor unless you pull back and watch how everybody else is dancing, and then pick your rhythm. It's very critical. Mental health is a critically huge issue right now. Reach out to other people and allow other people to reach out to you. The fact that you're in the public service or aspiring in the public service, or privileged to even be on this call because you have access to the internet, you are in a place of privilege. Recognize that, live with that, dissect that, find the truth and self-awareness within yourself, and then, you know, give yourself to society. And the most fulfilling parts, and happiness psychologists have said that the happiest people are not the self-serving. The happiest people are those who serve others, and that will give you the inspiration to continue moving. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. I love that. Get on the balcony and watch the dance floor. That's a brilliant one from you. Let me go over to Bogolo also for a response to both questions. We still have your mic on mute, Bogolo. Can you please unmute? Thank you.
All right. So the pathways for creating meaningful contributions are quite various, as we mentioned earlier. I mean, from volunteering to being in lobbying groups and so forth. And the one thing that I used to say was, you know, we do not see enough lobbying groups of citizenry. We do not see enough lobbying groups of young people. Instead, when you're a minister, you're seeing one person here, one person there. And if I'm to be honest, foreign companies, they will come as a group. If there's an issue that affects businesses, they will come as a group, and that creates a stronger lobbying voice and a stronger push to power for delivery. And I find that we have just really underestimated the power of coming together and ensuring that we speak with one voice. Even if it's just for the basics, then we have to build on those basics individually, but we would have created a common platform. And again, you know, if you're in the private sector and you feel like you can do policy, you feel like you can contribute, or there are things that are a hindrance to the way that you're doing business, it's always best to communicate and to advocate. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes some of the development doesn't come from government, it comes from the private sector. It's about also assuming your position in development of the country. It's about impact. It's the people of Botswana, for example, for Botswana. It can't be done by everyone else. And the challenge has always been, if we don't start our base, and we can't expect someone else to come in and build the base for us, because when they leave, then we are left with absolutely nothing. And this, I feel, this particular crisis is actually showing us that when you do not have your own base, then when people leave, when there's capital flight back to its own countries, then we have economies that are left vulnerable, and we have people that are left vulnerable without the necessary public services that are required domestically. And this is why it's also important for us to talk about local productive capacity. How do we encourage people to produce domestically, to produce even services domestically, to serve our internal countries, and then export to the neighboring before we can start looking elsewhere? So really there are various parts that we can use to contribute. Writing, you have lots of people who know how to write. Please use your talent. Write pieces, op-eds, newspapers, in the newspapers, even on social media. When something catches enough traction, I can assure you that it also reaches the highest offices. There is not a single act that is positive that will not make it. Do you have something to say before I continue, Rotimi?
How do you self-care in 1 minute? And I see that Honorable Emma Theophilus has joined us. I would like to also ask her to answer the last two questions before we wrap up this conversation. So first to you, I have a question on how do you self-care, and then I would go to Emma Theophilus.
Self-care is important. So for me, it was, again, removing the being from the office. And that is not the emotional part. It's just understanding that when people attack the office, they're attacking the office. They're not attacking you as a person, right? And because otherwise, if you take everything that happens in the public space and hold on to it as if it's a grudge, then you also emotionally and psychologically are unable to perform. So you need to learn how to separate. When I would go home, I would be Mahalo, I would be the child of the Guinot, and that is it. I'm not a minister. When I go to my parents' house, I am not a minister. They make me do the dishes. And I found that level of grounding was so important for me, because then for a brief moment, I'm able to take off that cap that has so much expectation from around the world for me to deliver. And instead, I'm being a child. Allow yourself to be that person, you know, to enjoy and relish the relationships that you have with different people. You have a relationship with the public as a minister, but you have a relationship with your parents as that child. You have a relationship with your siblings as that sister, and those are important to cherish. And then another thing is just meditate. I meditated, especially when things were really, really tough and there were too many demands. You know, you take a moment to just breathe and appreciate the life that God has given you, the trust that the people of your country have given you, and, you know, breathe in and breathe out and be ready for the day. And I also just really just like traveling. One of my advices to youth leaders: being a leader as a young person doesn't mean you have to be old. If you enjoy going out, go out. Still be you. Remain true to who you are. If you like traveling, travel. If you like eating out, eat out. Keep some parts of your life as normal as you can, because it's important that you do not lose the essence of who you are, because those and your passion are what will carry you through the tough periods.
Thank you very much, Bogolo, for those wise words. Meditation, travel, and you don't have to travel internationally if you currently cannot afford it. Travel locally, get to see your country.
Go to the Kettle Post. I went to the Kettle Post all the time.
Let me bring in Emma Theophilus, Deputy Minister of Information from Namibia, into this conversation. Apologies, she's joining us very late. And I'll just throw you the final two questions I've asked the two powerful women who we've been engaging with over the last couple of minutes. One is about what are the pathways for youth engagement to join policy conversation in government. On the continent these days, we see a lot of emotions and angst on social media, where young people feel that's the only platform where they can speak truth to power and be heard by government. Are there other pathways that we can bring young people into sustainable conversations around policy change in government? And the second question is, how do you self-care as a young person in public office? Over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Rotimi, and a good day to all the panelists and the attendees for this webinar. Apologies for coming a bit late. We are preoccupied with moving from one stage to another in our lockdown in our country, so that has been a transition right now. To answer the first question around youth engagement, first of all, before I became a member of parliament and now a deputy minister, I was very much policy adjacent. That meant that I worked a lot with organizations, whether it's civil society level, youth organizations that actually influence policies, because I learned from a very young age that once you're able to get policymakers' attention on how you think policy reform should happen, it's easier to get things done as opposed to talking all about it on social media or complaining all about it in the public space. So one example I can give, for example, when I was 17 years old, we realized, because I worked a lot with youth and children organizations, realized that the oldest Namibian law that protects children was in 1960. And that started the conversation about how can we find a way to push Parliament to pass a more law that is more responding to the issues of young people and children in Namibia today. That one started with engaging the relevant ministry, but the key thing in all of that was being organized. And I think that's something we take for credit a lot as young people. We do not become properly organized, and that leaves a lot of loopholes in people not either taking us seriously or not holding us accountable to the actions we'd like to have. So becoming more organized goes a long way. But secondly, in ensuring that our voices are heard, it's finding a way to push by pushing to sit at certain tables. I cannot tell you about the amount of trouble I've made or submissions I've made to just even MC an event to get a foot in the door so that the policymakers or the influential people in the system actually see me, to be able to understand that I have a voice and that the voice is relevant. And the most important thing from my side is action. You need to start somewhere. And I think that's some things we take for credit. They say actions speak louder than words. Organizing a small workshop or tea party or whatever you can with whatever resources you have, and demonstrating that where you're able to create basically a catalog of action steps that you have taken, create more credibility and more visibility that no one can take away from you, because then the actions speak for themselves. So I think for me, that has been my personal experience being a youth activist and policy adjacent before I got into the mix and thick of things of policy making, and that really has helped me so far. With regards to self-care, I must say that I'm still very new at public service. It's been a month and a week now. So truly, COVID-19 has put me in the thick of things. Being a Minister of Information, Communication, Technology has been quite a roller coaster ride in trying to communicate messages to get people to practice social distancing or get people to wash their hands in vernacular languages and in sign language and catering for those who are visually impaired. It has really been a sort of a baptism of fire for me, and it has been really that beginning that has been a challenging one, but I was able to adjust. So from my short experience, I can say one is continue to be in touch with my support system, people that check up on you and give you encouraging words. That includes my family and friends and my mentors that I continuously check in to see if they have any advice or words of encouragement to be able to get me going. But secondly, not stopping what I've been doing. I'm a big fan of reading books, watching a lot of series. So I do that a lot to be able to calm myself and be able to think, because especially with this time of COVID-19, a lot of things happen so quickly, and one's thought processes do not get a chance to be able to see what is happening around them and be able to register that. That has been helpful for me so far.
Thank you very much, Ima. Let me congratulate you once again on your appointment. As we know, you are the youngest minister on the continent as of today, and we're very proud of the work that you're doing. And I'm about to bring this to a close. Let me thank wonderful panelists, Rose, Bogolo, Ima. Thank you very much for your time, and thank for being very frank with us to discuss these issues, working in public service, the challenges, and how you've been able to bring your innovation, your determination, and your resilience into the work that you're doing for young people, pioneering for young people on the continent, and laying a path for other young people to follow. Thank you very much, ladies. And I would, at this point, go over to Monique Atugwe to present to us the wrap up from this conversation before we draw the conversation to a close.
Hi, everybody. Firstly, I just want to say a big thank you to our incredible speakers, both from today and yesterday. We are so inspired and encouraged by you and the work you do, and importantly, by the space that you're opening up for other young people. So we salute you and we thank you for your contributions today and yesterday. It's been an incredible 2 days of learning, engagement, and sharing of best practice. And from AFLI's Project Pagati, we just want to explain that we are approaching this issue from a supply and demand perspective. So you, the young people, the brilliant, capable young people and leaders, you are the supply. But what we need to do is stimulate and formalize the demand from a public service perspective. So that's really what the idea behind the first day, which was an engagement around specific policies and unpacking those specific reforms. So just to recap, the reforms that we explored yesterday were lowering political and economic barriers of entry, youth quotas and internships, special advisory roles and special advisory bodies, and parallel youth structures. Today, we heard from young people who have either benefited from some of these policies or are pioneers in public service and are leading the way for other young people. We have heard their testimonials, their experience, and also we have heard them share the call for the expansion of these policies, and we thank them for that. What is clear to us is that we need to carry out reform, there must be trust, credibility, and legitimacy. However, it is also clear to us that in this moment of global crisis, now is the time for change. Now is the time for new leadership, for new models of governance, and reform. So in terms of youth inclusion in public service, we must take a holistic approach because there is no silver bullet, and also because we know that youth is a horizontal issue. So every aspect of government, as I'm sure many can attest, affects young people, whether it's health, education, skills, labor, especially on a continent with such a large youth demographic. There is no single youth aspect. Everything in government affects young people. So there must also be political will to reform. And what else we have seen is that governments must create an enabling environment. It's not enough just to have progressive policies. The other thing that many of the speakers have touched on is that youth also need to be seen as co-creators and end users of these policies, as I have emphasized just now. So it's clear that we need to rethink, reform, reorient, and reinvent African public service. So once again, just from AFLI's side, we just want to say a big thank you to all the stakeholders of this project for all the hard work that was put in by the African Union's Office of the Youth Envoy. We are so grateful for your assistance and your help in realizing this really important workshop. And also a big thank you to our funders, the Ford Foundation, and a special thanks to the speakers from yesterday and today. As I said, we are humbled and inspired by your testimonials and the work that you are doing. I encourage you all to watch this space because the developments that will come of this will be promising, I assure you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monique. And let me once again thank everybody for joining us for today's conversation. It's been a very intense conversation and presentations that we've received from all the people who have contributed to today's conversation. Let me thank the African Union Special Envoy on Youth, Aya for the opening statement, as well as Dr. Jackie from the Africa Leadership Institute for opening statement and comments. We received 2 presentations from the African Union, one from Kevin Chacho of the African Union Department of Political Affairs, the other from Prudence, who also spoke on the issues of the African Program of Action on Youth Engagement from the African Union Youth Division. And we've had very intense debating conversation with Ima, Rose, and Bogolo, young women who are serving in public office in Africa, who has shared their experience, their challenges in office, and also interacted with question and answers from the audience who are watching us from all over the continent. Finally, let me thank all the young people who have joined from all the corners of the continent. Thank you for joining this very intense and interesting conversation and engagement. And we hope that you continue to join us in all our in all subsequent programming as we continue to do this. Behind the scenes, we've had a lot of colleagues who are working behind the scenes who made sure that this program run very smoothly. Many of them are not seen, but let me thank especially Chiamaka, Monique, colleagues at the Africa Leadership Institute and the Office of the Youth Envoy, and especially Neil also for all the technical work that has been done behind the scene, and all our comms team working on social media, ensuring that this goes smoothly. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you very much for the work that you've put in. It's at this point that we'll draw this program to a close. Continue to engage with us on social media, and we look forward to engaging with you subsequently. Thank you. Stay safe, and please follow all government guidelines around coronavirus in your country, and we hope to continue to engage with you. Have a wonderful day.